We're on. It's quite amusing, really, because I was speaking in my home church, and we had a new PA system fitted. And on this sound desk was a little old lady named Eva, and she's about that tall, and she's fearsome. And she was doing the sound, and afterwards, she came up to me and she said, "Oh, Paul, I do apologise. I didn't put your microphone on." I said, "Eva, that's okay. I've got a big gob." And she said, "Yes, you have." So that's about as you see where this is going to go this morning, don't you? So I want to start by quoting from a book which has been written by Nathan Blackaby, who is Christian Vision for Men's CEO. And this will give you an idea of what I'm going to be talking about. So, he says, so let's be honest about men's ministry. But first, let me quickly define how I am viewing it. Men's ministry isn't just a breakfast a month. So it isn't a men's ministry about a breakfast, a wet handshake, and a conversation that doesn't go anywhere near the bloke you really want to be. This is about awakening abandoned men to fight with, do life with, and see a load of men rescued from the gates of hell. That's my stance as well. And when I travel around, I do quite a lot of travelling, and I'll sort of tell you a bit more about that in a minute. But there are three types of churches when it comes to men. There are the church with no men's group at all. There's the church with a men's group that's become a gentleman's club. And there's the men's group that's overtly evangelistic and looking at ways in which to get alongside those unsaved blokes and introduce them to their Saviour. So, my stance is on the third one, of course. There's nothing worse, and I don't want to judge, but there's nothing worse, and I think you understand what I mean when I say there's nothing worse than a beige Christian man, who's beige. You're with me on that? So, just by way of introduction, please call me Gask. My first name is Paul. Nobody calls me Paul. My surname is Gask, G-A-S-K. Stick a Y on the end, and Gasky it is. If you call me Paul and I ignore you, I'm not doing it deliberately, but nobody calls me Paul. Only my wife, occasionally, several decibels higher. But, yeah. So, my role with Christian Vision for Men, and there's stuff here, please take it away. I'll refer to some of it in a bit, but please help yourself, take it all away. My role with Christian Vision for Men is as Regional Director for England North, which sounds very grand. It isn't. And my role is voluntary. So we're a very small team, and we've only got one member of our staff who is actually salaried. That's Nathan, the CEO, who wrote that book I've just quoted from. And the rest of the team, we're all volunteers. And I'm just putting that out there, not to make you feel sorry for me, but that's the fact. So my patch runs from Milton Keynes in the north. And I work with churches and church groups from across the denominations to try and encourage and equip and train and resource and motivate men to look their mate in the eye and tell him about his Saviour. That's what I do. And my patch goes right up to the Scottish border. And having said that, I've pretty much got free rein to go anywhere. So I've been as far south as the Isle of Wight, which is definitely not in the north. And I've been as far north as Largs on the west coast of Scotland, if you know that. And this time last year, I was actually in Falkirk, speaking at a conference there. And last year, last April, I was actually in Lanzarote. And I'm still trying to convince my wife it was actually ministry stuff. So I'll go anywhere. So my background, as Mark's just said, is as a police officer. I was a police officer in Leicestershire for 30 years, and I retired in 2011. So I know you're thinking, did he join when he was 9? No, you're not. Okay. You know, when you say that and there's ladies in the audience, they all go, oh. Blokes just laugh. So there you go. So when I reached that point in 2011 when I was retiring, I thought, right, now I can either play golf. Any golfers? A golfer. I used to play a lot of golf. My handicap was 6, which I'm told is not bad. So I thought I can play golf again, or I can take up lunchtime drinking, or I can catch up on the decorating jobs that I promised my wife I would do one day. But as I say to Sue, you never rush a craftsman. So try that. You can have that one. Let me know how you get on. But a week after retirement, I went back to work for the police in a civilian capacity. And I'll tell you why. Because the last 5 years of my service, I worked in police anti-corruption. So I investigated my colleagues, which probably explains why I don't seem to have many friends. But there's not a corruption problem in Leicestershire, I have to say that. I was part of a unit of 4, and we basically investigated criminals in uniform, if that makes sense. And I went back to work after retiring because I'd spent 2 years working on a particular job, bent cop, and he was a bad un. And I spent 2 years working on it. So they said, I was officer in the case. So they said, will you come back and just see the job off? So I went back a week after retiring, as I say, and on a temporary contract, I did 7 months. The job came to fruition. Said officer was arrested, and he got 5 years in prison. Good riddance. So I then applied for, I thought, well, why don't I work for a job that I know? So I applied for a role working in the counter-terrorism arena, which I did for the next 5 years. And I always wondered why I ended up working in that particular area. I know why, and it's a talk all on its own, but I actually met a bloke who was a member of the extreme far right, and I'm working with him and other agencies. I ended up leading him to the Lord, and his name's Chris, and we now go out together under this banner called Extreme Men, and it's a story all on its own. But I really do believe God put me in that role because the bulk of my policing was done in the CID, in plain clothes. So I've worked in general CID, I've worked in lots of squads, so I've worked in the vice squad, in the drug squad, on a surveillance unit. In fact, I've probably done everything except anything to do with any financial investigation, because I've got no financial acumen at all. My brother got that gift, so I didn't get anything like that. But right from the outset, as a kid growing up in Leicester, I was the youngest of 3, no faith upbringing in our house, and I was shipped off to Sunday school. But I think for a lot of kids in the 60s, that happened to a lot of us. And I think the reason was not so much to introduce me to my saviour, but to sort of get me out of the way. So, and that happened to a lot of kids, I think. And it probably does explain why I do have a brother and a sister, but I'll leave that one there. And so I went through the educational system, pretty average kid. My big thing in life was playing football. That was my passion. I was, at the age of 15, selected to play for Leicester City youth team. and I played alongside somebody you may have heard of called Gary Lineker. You're familiar with Gary Lineker? Yeah. Obviously, yeah. Obviously, Gary made the grade. I didn't. Not because, well, not only was I not good enough, but my love for playing sport was quickly replaced by alcohol, women, and tobacco. Not necessarily in that order, but but that's what sort of consumed my life. So I joined the Leicestershire Police at 21, and I didn't spend a long time in uniform. I built up a reputation as being known as a bit of a thief-taker. They do say it takes one to catch one. And policing was very different, of course, in the 80s and 90s. And I'll leave that one there, but it was very different. So I quickly got a role in the CID, in plain clothes, and I thought I'd arrived. I really thought I'd arrived. We had a big drinking culture in our office. You can imagine some of the banter that went on. And my drive was to be the best detective in the office. And I was. So I had the best personal detection rate. I had the most number of informants. I had the best arrest rate. And I was at the top of the tree. And that was my drive. So despite being married to my wife, Sue, and being blessed by 2 daughters, my job consumed my whole life. So I wasn't really a dad in that sense. So I didn't go to any school performances, parents' evenings. I was too busy. I hadn't got time. I was a father in that I provided, but I wasn't a dad, if that makes sense. So in the early to mid-1990s, as a force, we seemed to have a number of murder inquiries which seemed to happen one after another. And every time this happened, the policy in them days was to form an incident room of a team of detectives from around the county. And every time it happened, I was crewed up with a guy, I'm going to call him John, that's not his proper name. I'll call him John for the purposes of today. But John worked at a police station about 12 miles from where I was based in South Leicestershire, Wigston, if you know it. John was based in Hinckley, if you know that. And he was a top fella. He was such a laugh. He was one of life's natural comedians. He liked a few beers. He thought he could drink me under the table. He tried many times and failed. And the relationship we had was really close. And when you're working with somebody 12, 14, 16 hours a day, you get to know them. Or so you think. But I went to work one Saturday morning in 1995, and my detective inspector called me in the office. And I thought, what have I done? And he said, you better sit down. He said, there's no easy way to tell you this, but last night John took his own life. Now, we used to joke, John and I, that the next murder inquiry we get will drag the body just outside of Leicestershire so they can deal with it and not us, which is not funny. But John actually took his own life 100 yards across the border into Warwickshire, and only I knew that. And to say I didn't cope with it very well is somewhat of an understatement. And in those days, there was no counselling, there was no sort of welfare, formal welfare available. The answer to everything was, come on, we'll go and have a beer and we'll be all right. That was the answer to everything. It didn't work for me. And it triggered something in me where I can only describe it. I wasn't so much pressing the self-destruct button, I was leaning on it. And I started to spiral downwards. I got really angry. It used to manifest itself in anger. And just to give you a quick example of that, I was a CID officer, and there is a branch of the police who are traffic officers. And I didn't do anything, by the way. And and obviously, detectives and traffic, the two didn't really go together. And I mean, it's horses for courses, but I could never get my head round why stop a car and say, "Excuse me, mate, your light's out," when we were catching burglars and robbers and people who beat up old ladies and all that. That's just me. So traffic was never my thing. But as I say, policing was very different. The way we behaved as plainclothes officers was very different. And it's not big, it's not clever, don't do it. But drinking and driving didn't really faze any of us. And just to give you an example of that, some Saturday mornings, I'd look out of my bedroom window and my car would be like skew whiff on the drive with the door open. And I'd say to my wife, "What's happened there?" She went, "You did that last night." I couldn't remember really. But like I say, it's not big, it's not clever, don't do it. So for Christmas, a particular traffic officer put the word out that he was going to breathalyse a detective. And it was going to be me. Of course, word got back to me. So I went in the bar one night with my colleagues, and there, one police station's had bars, of course, and there in the bar was a bunch of traffic officers enjoying their slimline oranges, and I sound terrible, don't I? And without saying anything, I punched this particular traffic officer as hard as I could, and he went down like a sack of potatoes. And my colleagues were like, "Well, he asked for that, really, but blah, 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 blah." But then I jumped on him and I battered him. I really battered him and actually put him in hospital, which I'm not proud of. And I'm not a hard man. I'm not proud of that at all. Thankfully, he never did complain. And had he done, I would have certainly lost my job. I would have probably lost my liberty. But he never did complain. And there's a story to all this right at the end, which I will share with you, but I can't share it on the recording, if that makes sense. But I will share with you what happened at the end. But he never did complain. But when I was interviewed, they said, "How many times did you hit him?" And I said, 4 or 5. And they said, "Well, all the people in there have said they lost count at 30 plus times." And I'd lost the plot. I'd lost it. The grief and the way I felt wretched. And I was just so angry. Thankfully, never at home. But I was just an angry man. And to top the lot, here I was spiralling downhill. I was drinking heavily. I was pretty much behaving like a single bloke. And I don't have to go into detail, surely. I was doing all sorts of stuff like that. And I just felt terrible. Now, to compound everything, my wife used to take our girls to the local church, to like the Mums and Tots group. And she came home after going to an event in Leicester called Christian Praise, which used to take place. It was an annual event, took place at De Montfort Hall in Leicester, if you know it. And she only went because she promised to take somebody, to give somebody a lift. But she came home from there and she announced that she'd given her life to Jesus. And I thought, well, that's it then. I'm even further down the pecking order. And I didn't like any of her church friends. I didn't like church at all. I just thought it's got no relevance to my life whatsoever. And when I did go to church, to the mandatory baptisms, weddings and funerals, I just found them alien places. You know, they seemed to be full of old people. He says, avoiding all eye contact. They seemed to be full of old people. They sang songs about loving another bloke. There was lots of flowers, lots of tapestries, lots of pictures drawn by kids. And then the Anglican tradition, which is what I was brought up in, Even the chap running the service wore what I perceived to be a dress. So it had no relevance to me. And I thought, how can this have any relevance to my life when 10 hours ago somebody was trying to kill me in the city centre? So it had no relevance to me at all. And I made it quite plain what I thought of Sue's new church friends. And I built up a reputation as being known as the man who occasionally speaks between swearing. Because I used to try and rev them up. It was a bit of sport. Let's get them going. I loved it because I could try and rev them up. But my life was going down the pan. It really was going down the pan. And I decided that I didn't want to be married anymore. So on the evening of Sue taking our girls to a pantomime, I said to her, when you come back, I won't be here because I'm leaving. I just wanted to run away. I felt like a little boy, frightened little boy. Here I was, the Charlie Bananas in the CID, and yet deep down I felt like a little boy who wanted to run away, and I got nowhere to run to. So I said, I don't want to be married anymore. Sue still took our girls to that pantomime because she'd promised them. But on the way out, she nipped into our local vicarage because she'd been talking to our local vicar. My husband is going down the pan. And Tony, his name is. And Tony said, I'll go and talk to your husband. And she kept saying, the time's not right. The time's got to be right. Because if you go and it's not right, he's likely to assault you. And that's where I was. I'm not proud of that, but that's where I was. I was all consumed by this grief. So she nipped round to the local vicarage. So as I'm packing my car with my worldly possessions, up turns this little clergyman, and he's about 4 foot on a fag paper tall, and I mean a giant of a man in my eyes now, but he's a little fella, and I couldn't get rid of him. He won't go away. Despite using every single word of Anglo-Saxon that I knew, and I probably made some up as well, he just won't go away. And eventually I said to him, look, Tony, when I'm sorted out, I'll come and talk to you. And he said, right, now you've said that, if I said to you, I'll come and talk to you, and I didn't, you'd call me a hypocrite. I said, yeah, I would. He said, so you've got to come and talk to me. I said, I will. I had no intentions of ever seeing him again. Just wanted rid of him. Anyway, he left. So I left my marital home. I got nowhere to go. I sofa surfed. I slept in our office at work. I slept in my car. And occasionally I slept in the cell block of the police station I worked at. And I was just drinking heavily, spiralling downhill. And the only way I can describe it, the only way I didn't feel in any sort of internal pain was when I was asleep. But I couldn't sleep due to anxiety and everything else. So I used to try and induce sleep any way I could. And if that meant having half a bottle of whiskey with my cornflakes, that's what I did. And how I kept my job, I don't know. But we all wear masks, don't we? But how I kept my job, I have no idea. And when the drink didn't work, to knock me out, I started to dabble in substances you don't buy across the counter at Boots. And I just wanted to be, I just wanted not to feel as I felt, because I felt wretched. So I was spiraling down and down and down and down. And then I came to the decision that if I was no longer here, then I wouldn't be in any more pain. And it was as simple as that. So I decided to take my own life. Now, I didn't tell anybody, and I didn't leave any notes. I just decided that the world would be a better place if Paul Gask was no longer in it. And my wife would move on, and my girls would forget about me. So I wasn't fussed. So on New Year's Eve, going into 1996, I decided to jump from a railway bridge in the city centre. And the irony was, it was New Year's Eve and people were partying and celebrating and having a good time, and I just felt absolutely wretched. So I climbed on the wall of this bridge, and I was literally one step from going over when I became aware of an inner voice, which I wrote off as conscience. And the voice said to me, just remember how angry you were when John took his own life. Don't do it. And it made me get off the wall. Didn't bring me to my senses in that respect, but it made me get off the wall. And I wandered around for 3 days until I found myself at the door of our local vicarage. And Tony opened the door and said, you better come in. Well, he didn't actually. He went, you better come in, because he's a little. And I went in, and I sat in Tony's study, and I couldn't talk for an hour. I was sobbing, uncontrollably sobbing. You know, a proper bloke cry, you know, snot and everything. Proper bloke cry. And is he okay, by the way? Have I touched a nerve? Is he okay? Yeah. And Tony said to me, do you want to go home? And I thought, how can I? How can I? Because I put my wife through hell. I did. I deprived her of money. I started divorce proceedings, and I put her through hell. But unbeknown to me, and Sue told me this afterwards, unbeknown to me, when I left, despite being told by some people in church to get rid of me, he's a waste of space, Sue clung on to the fact that I was going to return. And she felt compelled to read a passage from 1 Corinthians 7 in the Bible, which is questions about marriage. And I'll have to paraphrase this because I'm no theologian, but it basically said, if your unbelieving husband leaves, let him leave in peace. You never know, wife, how you handle this might not only bring him back to you, but bring him back to me. And she clung on to that. And she had a dream that I was working for a Christian organisation. She dreamt that I was preaching in church. And on that note, and I know this is hard to believe, but I did do a 3-year course in theology with the Leicester Diocese. And, well, that 3 years took me 4 years, because I was working on the Madeleine McCann inquiry, if that, you know that one. It made the national news and has recently as well. So I'd have to have a year out. But I did a 3-year course in theology, which took me 4 years. And the Bishop of Leicester, in his infinite wisdom, decided to license me as an evangelist. So I had a bit of paper saying I could do it. So she dreamt that. And she also dreamt I was singing in a Christian rock band. And I've done that. I know it's hard to believe. I was in a band called Eye to Eye. We recorded 2 CDs. You might find one in a charity shop somewhere, if they've not all been purchased, to be hung up and to keep cats off people's lawns. But our big thing was when we got to support Helen Shapiro, for those who are of an age to know Helen Shapiro. So that was our big thing. So I did that as well. So Sue said, he's going to come back, he's going to come back. So here I am. I wasn't man enough to go to my own home. So I had to hold the hand of this little clergyman who took us to my front door. And Sue allowed us in. And praise God, in human terms, my wife is the hero in my story. She is the hero in my story. But of course, I sat with her and I told her that I'd contemplated taking my own life. So she, straight on the phone to our GP. Our GP is a member of our church. So you see where this is going, don't you? So I went to see my GP and he said, I'm so concerned that you need an urgent mental health assessment, and if you can't, he said to Sue, if you can't take him, I'll get an ambulance, it's that serious. So I was chucked in the car and driven to one of Leicester's hospitals, which is the mental health unit there is now closed. But I was dispatched there for a mental health assessment. And on the way there, I said to Sue, if they try to admit me or they section me, I'm going to kick off. And she said, well, worry about that, because that's where I was. I was an angry man. I said, I will kick off. So we went into this mental health unit, and I'll never forget this. It was a long corridor in like a polytunnel. And as we walked through the first set of doors, a door at the side opened, and this massive fella appeared. He was massive. A member of staff. He was enormous. And I looked at him and I thought, flipping heck, he's a big lad. But I thought, if I go in with as much violence as possible, I might be able to take him out. And then a door opposite opened, and I think it was this fella's twin brother. And I looked at him and thought, this is not one you're going to win. And then 2 more doors opened, and 2 more members of staff appeared who were tasty fellas as well. So I thought, well, you just got to go through with this. And I had a real lengthy mental health assessment, and I was diagnosed with suffering from severe clinical depression and PTSD through some of the things I've obviously experienced over my police career. And I actually had regular weekly therapy for over 12 months. Whether that's available now, I don't know, because we all know how stretched mental health services are. But as I wasn't admitted and I wasn't sectioned, but I was prescribed some medication, and initially I had some really strong medication, which basically made me into a bit of a zombie, if I'm honest. They're like tranquilizers. And they said the medication for my mental health would take 2 weeks to kick in. So they said to Sue, don't leave him on his own. And she didn't. And that's all very well when you want to go to the toilet. And there's your wife. Have you finished yet? You know? And she didn't leave me alone. But I call him my head doctor. My head doctor said, if you want to save your marriage, you've got to tell your wife exactly what you've done. And I thought, I can't. How can I tell her about some of the away fixtures I'd had with some women who she probably knew? How can I? How can I tell her why we're £15,000 in debt? Because most of that had gone up my nose. How can I tell her? But I knew I had to. And the best bit of theology I've ever heard, this is not biblical, but it's the best bit of theology I've ever heard, is a good confession is like a good puke. It makes a heck of a mess, but it's better out. And James in the Bible puts it a little bit more eloquently than that, but I think you know where I'm coming from. So I dropped these bombshells onto my wife. And like I say, praise God, she allowed me back into her life. So there I am, I'm off work, I'm signed off, I'm on strong medication, I've dropped bombshell after bombshell, and as you appreciate, I've got a lot of brownie points to earn. So there I am, and Sue came to me one day and she said, we're having a bring and share evening at the vicarage, will you come? And I thought, oh no, please. I would rather remove my eyes with pins. But I had no choice. I'd got brownie points to earn, so I said, I will go. But I said to Sue, the first bloke who says something, I'm going to take him outside, vicarage or no vicarage, and I'm going to give him a bit of a slap. And Sue said, they won't say anything. And I said, they will. I said, because you lot, you're all judgmental. You all point the finger. You all think you're holier than thou, and you will. I'm just telling you, somebody's going to get a slap. So I turned up at the vicarage, and I met some Christian men. And despite my preconceived ideas of what a Christian man was like, because I thought they were all weak and all needy, despite that, I met these fellas and I worked out they were some of the strongest men I'd ever met. And what I also learned, and every single one of us can learn from this, including myself, nobody judged me. Nobody did. And it really took the wind out of my sails. So we went home and went to bed, and I went to sleep with some pleasant thoughts for a change. I then had what I can only describe as my worst nightmare ever. Now, I'm not easily intimidated. As you can tell by my good looks, I've been around a bit. I've been stabbed twice. I'm not going to show you where because we've just eaten. I've been shot at, and I've had my nose broken more times than I care to remember. So I'm not easily frightened by much. But this was the most frightening experience of my life. And in my nightmare, I was being pulled between two forces. On one side, it was just black, there was nothing there. And on the other side, there was a tiny speck of light. And I was being pulled between the two. To such an extent, I really believed I was going to be torn in half. I wasn't bothered which side was going to win in that sense. I just wanted to be let go. Unbeknown to me, I'm thrashing about in bed, screaming out. So my wife, I didn't know I was asleep, my wife is praying over me. I didn't know, I was out of the game. And after this titanic battle where, like I say, I really do believe I was going to be torn in half, the darkness let go of me. And I was propelled towards this light, which got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until I was released into a pure blinding light. Not like this, but a pure light. So I woke up, sat up in bed. I was wet through with sweat, confused, trying to work out what's just happened. So Sue, bless her, decides now's the time to fetch a copy of the Why Jesus booklet that she'd hidden in her sewing basket downstairs. So she's out, and as soon as she left our bedroom, I became aware of another presence in our bedroom. And in the corner of our bedroom, a figure held out his hands towards me and said, "Paul, just trust in me." And I knew it was Jesus. I just knew it was. Now, you'd think, being a former cop, I'd be able to give you a bit of a description of him. You know, he's about 5'10", got long hair, beard. I can't. And it's not a cop-out, excuse the pun, but the only way I can describe him as pure peace. So at 1:10 a.m. on Sunday, the 3rd of March, 1996, my life changed forever. I knew Jesus was alive, but didn't know anything about him. So that started my journey. My first Bible was a kid's Bible because it had got pictures in it. And that started my journey. But of course, I had to go back to work. So I had to go back to that CID office, to that arena, that banter, that culture. I had to go back. And to be fair to my colleagues, I could have been a little bit more subtle. I'm no shrinking violet, as you probably appreciate. But I walked into our office on my first day back, and it was all busy, and the phones are going, and it was packed, and people were everywhere. And I went, "Ladies and gentlemen, whilst I've been off, I've met the risen Lord Jesus Christ." And they said, "Gask, since you've been off with a mental health problem, we don't think you should be back." And of course, they tried to explain away what happened. Some said I made it up to save my marriage. Well, all I can say to that, and Sue does know this, at that time, my marriage meant nothing to me. But I get why they would say it. Some said that I was hallucinating. I get it. But all I can say to that is I'd never hallucinated before, or indeed since. But I understand why they would say it. Some said it was a result of the medication I was on. But all I can say, never said anywhere on my prescription, that a likely side effect was a visit from the risen Lord Jesus Christ. Didn't say that. But But I get why they would say it. And some even said we had a burglar in our house. Well, all I can say to that is there was nothing stolen. Plus, had it been an intruder in my house, he wouldn't have got out alive. That's a fact. But I get why they would say it. And of course, they took the mick. They took the mickey. And I went in one day and my desk was covered in a purple cloth with a candle on each corner, like some sort of altar. And we also had a tannoy system that was audible in the car park of our police station. And I parked my car one morning to be greeted by about 1,000 decibels of onward Christian soldiers, you know. So they took the mick. But all I said to them was, you'll see a different Paul Gask. Time will tell. Don't get me wrong, I am far from the finished article, as is painfully obvious. But I know I'm not the man I should be, but I am so grateful that I'm not the man I was. And I am journeying. Next year, I'll have been trying to follow the Lord for 30 years. And there's tons of stories that I could share over those 30 years, particularly in the last 10 years since I've been in this role with Christian Vision for Men. And obviously, I'll go all over the place. But I want to finish with a story. I'm going to take some questions then. Is that all right? Have I got time? Or are you going to kick me out? Have you? Okay, 2 minutes. I just want to finish with a quick story. As I've said, I travel all over the place. And I was unwittingly getting into this mode of Christian celebrity, if that makes sense, to my shame, not knowingly. And it came on the back of me speaking at some big events, like New Wine, you know, big events. So when I was asked to speak somewhere, my first thought was, how many are going to be there? That used to be my first thought. And then it was, right, I want my own parking space. I want a green room. I want a vase of freshly cut flowers. I want a little saucer of mints. And I was getting into that mode. And I got asked to speak at a men's breakfast up in Lancaster, near Blackpool. And I don't often travel overnight. I have here. I don't often do it because I don't mind getting up and I don't mind driving. So when you live in Leicester and you've got to get to Blackpool for 8:30 for breakfast, you've got to leave early. So I turned up at this venue and there were 6 churchmen for breakfast. And it's important, I do stress that, 6 churchmen for breakfast. So where I'm from, you call that having the hump. I had the hump. Only 6 blokes, and they're all churchmen anyway. And the breakfast wasn't the best breakfast I've ever had. It was not a patch on what we've enjoyed this morning, and thank you for gentlemen who have prepared that. But the breakfast was 1 little bit of bacon in 1 little roll. That was it. So I had the right hump now. And I thought, well, you're here, just do what I've asked you to do. So I shared a bit about my story. And there was a guy there named Peter. And Pete burst into tears. Churchman with his churchmen. He burst into tears. Of course, they're saying, Pete, what is it? And he said, none of you know this. He said, but I've been suspended from my job. He worked at Lancaster University. He said, I've been suspended from my job. And the stress of it all has been so intense that my wife's left me. And in the boot of my car is some rope that I bought because I was going to end my life today or next week. And I had to get in my car and say, Lord, I'm really sorry. Because if he says to me, I want you to drive 190 miles and have a bacon sandwich with a bloke who needs to hear about me, not you, about me, you do it, won't you? And I said, yes, Lord, I will. And it also reinforced to me that even men in church don't know anything about the other fellows in church, or very little. As you probably worked out, men and mental health is a big thing for me. It's a big thing for me. I don't know if you've heard of Andy's Man Club, national organisation. I do quite a bit of work with Andy's Man Club. and a movement called the Modern Men Movement in Leicester. It's a big thing for me. And that's what we're trying to do at CVM, is to get that culture going where we don't just say to another bloke, how are you? And I'll do it myself tomorrow in church. Somebody will say to me, Gask, how are you? And I'll go, I'm all right. And I'm all right, but if I say to another bloke, how are you? He'll say, I'm all right, mate, even if his life's in bits. Because that's what we do. And we're trying to create that culture where, and I'll encourage you to say to another fella, not how you doing, but how you feeling? Which is a question, culturally, we don't ask another fella. How are you feeling? But you've got to be prepared to respond if he tells you. Because if you don't, you probably do more harm than good. And there's a whole subject on its own. So I'm going to bring it into land there, gentlemen. Thank you for the invitation today, Tim. Thank you for the breakfast again, fellows. It was amazing. And I don't know where you are in your walk with the Lord. I don't know. That's not my business. But I've spent the last almost 30 years doing what I do to try and encourage guys, as I said at the start, to look their mate in the eye and tell him about his Saviour. So we'll take a question or two. We've got time, I think. Ask away. Yes, sir.
Have you had any of your former colleagues of the faith?
Yeah, 4 of them.
Really?
Yeah. Nothing to do with me. But 4 of them have. And in fact, one of the main protagonists of the banter is actually an ordained minister now. Because God's got a sense of humour, hasn't he? So, but yeah, 4 of them have, yeah.
Can I ask, your obsession with being a detective, has that overwhelmed you with your being a Christian man? Because obviously, have you paid it back to your wife, or have you neglected your wife since becoming a Christian man?
What a question that is. And it's a fair question. I'll answer that by saying, people say to Sue, have you forgiven him? And she'll say, 90% I have, and the other 10% I have to rely on God. That's how she answers that. And she'll also say, because obviously, without her, I couldn't do this. I couldn't be on the road as much as I am, couldn't do it. But she will say to people, if Paul's okay, or Gask, if Paul's okay with God, then I'm okay. Does that answer? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Making notes here. I want to get this straight in this. When the light appeared upon the bed, and you know it was Jesus and he spoke to you, what was that? What words did you use to describe the feeling? Total peace.
What did I say? Yeah, pure peace. Yeah, I just felt. Yeah, and it's a bit of a cliche, really, saying it's the peace that passes all understanding, but it is. There's no other way of saying it. I experienced a peace I'd never experienced before, or indeed since, to be honest. But yeah, I actually left the CID. I came out of the CID, and I don't want to go on longer than I should, but I didn't want to go back to that environment. So I told my boss I was withdrawing from the CID, and for 2.5 years, I ended up working in a role in crime intelligence. That's a laugh in itself. I worked in crime intelligence, and I did Monday to Friday, regular hours, 8 till 4, no weekend working, no shifts. And it enabled me, A, to explore my faith, and more importantly, I suppose, that sounds terrible, but it enabled me also to rebuild my marriage, rebuild the respect of my girls. And going back to what I said earlier, if it wasn't for Christ's intervention in my life, Sue would have moved on. My girls would have forgot about me, and I would have never have met my 5 amazing grandkids. So when I say I owe Jesus everything, I mean it. I don't take myself seriously, but I take the Lord very seriously. Any further questions? If there are, then come and speak to me privately. But thank you, gentlemen. I really do appreciate your time. Thank you.
You can call me Mark. That everybody does, because that's my name. Thank you, Gasky. That was really good. Thank you very much. Please speak to him afterwards. You said there's something you want to say off recording. Do you want to turn the recording off, Mark?